Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to this opening keynote plenary, Is Nothing Private Anymore? I'm Claire Fox. I'm the director of the Institute of Ideas. This session is very core to the themes of the festival this year on the confusion between the public and private spheres.
Our Instagram selfies, our Twitter feeds, our Facebook status updates, you can know just about anything about anyone if they choose to violate their own privacy. And I think when it comes to government surveillance or even tech company surveillance of its users, we tend to have a pretty strong reaction to that. We have an opinion about those violations of privacy. But when it comes to talking about why we violate our own privacy, we're a lot more muddled. And I think that's because it's an instinct. We have a deep instinct for privacy that we often don't understand exists until it's violated. But I want to make a little argument about how our technologies play into that. I think our software and our machines are actually designed to elicit more information from us and have encouraged us to embrace the constant revelations that we feed them. But there's a reason that our culture has devised terms such as oversharing, TMI, too much information, and the phrase that I think captures a particular kind of anxiety of our age, FOMO, fear of missing out. So these things all play into why we want to violate our own privacy. What I want to challenge us to think about today is whether we're moving towards an idea of self that is more transparent, but that also leads us into being a kind of people who are fearful of having an undata-based experience.
In the old days, in the Catholic world, the confessional was a private sphere. It was built on the intimacy of secrets. And now the world has been turned into a giant confessional. So the currencies in this world are of self-revelation. The idea that secrets are lies are benefiting the large Silicon Valley companies because they are the peddlers in this new intimacy. The ultimate consequence of all this, though, and this idea of secrets are lies, I think, is the death of conventional political ideology. The tyranny today is of the personal, of the private, of the confessional. And we need, as with all tyrannies, to throw this off.
I've made a career out of confessing to an audience. I even implicated my own parents. I believe that talking openly about ourselves, our foibles, our failures, as well as our successes, makes for a richer, more intelligent, more aware, more tolerant, and more diverse society. I go so far as to believe it's an individual's social, moral responsibility to be open. The personal is political, and self-revelation leads to social revelation, which leads to progress, and on this I'm unchangeable.
I had to share a bedroom with my brother until I was 15. Am I to consider that my privacy was routinely violated up until the age of 15, but suddenly I was liberated from this violation at the age of 15? Actually, at the time, I'd have said that the answer was certainly yes. And he probably would have said exactly the same thing. But of course, we used to live in societies that had to live very much more closely together. People lived all together in one room. If sex was going to happen, then it had to happen unpixelated, but presumably when other people were asleep. All we're saying there is that concepts of privacy are relative and mutable and they alter. And therefore, we are also saying that we have a particular series of problems and challenges dealing with how the concepts of privacy alter in the light of new technology. In the discussion of the tension between privacy, as we now understand it to be, and free expression, I tend to come down on the side of freedom of expression.
I actually think that freedom and privacy are mutually reinforcing concepts, and that privacy is logically prior, both historically and logically prior to freedom and the exercise of freedom, rather than being antithetical. If you go back to the Greeks, Pericles' famous speech, you will find that it was always seen as having an existentially fundamental role to play. And it seems to me that what we're suffering from in this discussion is a confusion to do with history, because although privacy is experienced relatively, there are certain absolute fundamental themes that are central to it as an existential need for our humanity and for our capacity to be free individuals. And I think what has happened is that because of the historical amnesia of our time, we lose sight of the concept that we use. For example, everybody in this panel, I would imagine myself included, occasionally talk about the confessional. It's actually a historically inappropriate term because there's nothing more private than a confessional is. If you know anything about Catholic liturgy, It's an extremely intimate relationship that you develop with God through the medium of somebody else. And the duty of the priest is to kind of very seriously police the confidence that you kind of expressed there. I think it's a sign of the times that we can't even retain the confessional in its proper historical sense by the fact that in places like Australia and elsewhere, there are Catholic churches that have transparent confessional booths because we're worried about the priest, abusing that particular kind of right. And the fact is, we can't even hold on to something fundamental as that. I think that the problem that we face is a cultural one, and it's not a technological one. I think that a long time before the internet, cultural pressures have been created which pathologize privacy. There's already important discussions in the United States, David Reisman's Lonely Crowd, discussions on candid camera, which happened a very long time in the 50s, which already indicate that if we go down this road, we are going to lose our sense of self and can only realize it as a public performance. So there's already that stuff that's kind of coming out. And I think what the tragedy is that people, when they talk about privacy these days, are always conscious of the old forms of the attack on it. The police keeping an eye on us, identity cards, sort of the NSA spying on us. And I think that's the most trivial aspect. That's nothing new about it. And usually it's kind of overplayed quite a bit. Well, what we're very scared to address directly is that we're so uncomfortable with the private sphere that we increasingly have changed our language. So the word secret now is the worst thing you can do. You can't have a secret with a child, because that's a marker of being an abuse. You can't have a family secret, because, why are you hiding something? But of course, if you know human history, you know that we all have our secrets. Our psychological needs for secrets is really quite important, and we're all entitled to have our secrets, because that's the way we make our way, and that's the way we, sort of learn to live with the world and the pressures that are kind of bear upon us. But I think what's very sad to me is that when you look at the way that the private sphere is talked about, it becomes a site of abuse, it becomes a site of domestic violence. And whereas everybody in this room would say that when a policeman says, what's wrong, why are you worried about an identity card? If you got nothing to hide, what are you worried about? If you're innocent, we all know what to say. We all say, well, actually, it's none of your business, as to whether I'm innocent or not. That's my right as a citizen. But when somebody comes along and says that we need to check what's going on in your family in the name of the child, and if you got nothing to hide, if you're a good mother and father, then, what are you worried about? Then everybody caves in and rolls over. What I'm trying to suggest is that the minute you sort of emphasize the intimate aspects of our life, personal relationships between man and woman, husband and wife, children and adults, then it's really cool to colonize the private space of people, because that's actually, a good thing. At that point, the private sphere becomes seen as being an entirely hostile environment with very little redeeming features. And you might say, well, that actually means we worship the public sphere. But of course, we know from human history that the quality of public life is 120% dependent on our capacity to be private individuals. When I hear, for example, last week, the head of Ofsted saying that the problem of education in Britain is bad parenting, and that actually what happens in the private sphere that is responsible for a public problem, you do realize there's been a massive shift in the way that we view our world. So whereas ever since the Enlightenment, we more or less saw social problems as what they really were, sort of problems to do with the public sphere, the way that the economic, social life was organized and distributed. We now increasingly blame the private sphere, what happens within the domain of the private, as the cause of virtually every single social distress. So education, craft parents, child obesity, craft parents, sort of drug addiction, self-harming, virtually every problem that exists in the public domain, you have a causal dynamic that brings it back to what happens within our intimate life. That's really what it, where we got to go. And as David Cameron, our Prime Minister, said in this country, we got 200,000 horrible families, and they're responsible for just about everything that is corrosive, within our society. So what I'm trying to say is that you destroy the private, the culture of privacy, which is what we've done, and you implode the public, because you no longer see problems in the public domain as susceptible to public solutions. You see all the solutions as kind of basically saving children from their parents, basically saving women from their husbands, or husbands from their wives. And you do end up in a world where we do become caricatures ourselves.